Hi, it's Susan. I want to talk about some of the challenges of homelessness, what it's like. I've been homeless for 2 years, and those who've looked at my videos can see it goes way back 2 years ago. There is a definite stuckness when you don't have income. And if you've been out of the workforce for a long time, it's virtually impossible to get back in. And when you're looking at, for every job, 17 people are going for the job, you're going to have a lot of challenges. It's fraught with challenges. The moving around from place to place is extremely disrupting because you have to pack all your stuff up. You're also, if you're staying with people you don't know very well, you have to be absolutely careful that you don't, create a mess or inconvenience people. You've got to be very sensitive to other people's needs. It's very hot in here, so I don't want to make this too long. I just felt very strongly I want to do a video on homelessness. The income disparity, the income inequality makes it virtually impossible to access any services that others access other than occasional food. I don't have an income and haven't had an income for 2 years. Now people will say, well, how will you survive? Well, I've got a faith, and it's not a faith, it's a knowingness that there is a higher power, and I have trusted that. If I didn't have that, there's no way I could do what I'm doing. I'm getting very hot, so it's just going to be 39 today. So I don't have air conditioning in my car because I have a cheap car because I can't afford a car like everybody else. I can't get an SUV. It's income inequality, and people say, well, you don't work, you haven't earned that. Well, actually I do work. I work every day on peace, but I'm not paid for it. You can say, well, show some initiative and get a job. Well, it's not as easy as that. And it's very easy for our society to absolve itself of responsibility for those homeless by saying get a job. That's not the world we're in anymore. When I was young, I'm 54 now, when I was in my 20s, you could pick up a job easily. And prior to that, you could walk in anywhere and get a job. There was no criteria. There was no problem. People knew each other, communities were smaller, so you had more opportunities. When you're disconnected like we are in our world, people are moving around all the time, families have broken down, and that's a consequence of an economic system or juggernaut that's gone way too fast. We also have trends in certain sectors. Some sectors take off, others don't. The manufacturing sector has been in decline since the 80s pretty much, if not before then. Manufacturing is very important as a basis for employment. The property market is what they're using to try and, through infrastructure project, they're trying to boost the economy through infrastructure projects. But the reality is that the money's going offshore because they're overseas investors. We're not paying it out of tax base. So yes, you might get a one-off injection into the economy through wages, but the country doesn't own the assets. In some cases, I don't know of any cases as yet because I haven't really done the research on what assets we're actually owning, but we're certainly seeing a huge privatisation drive which has an ideological basis. But how does that serve the people, and how does that serve homeless people? You get social exclusion. There's no way I could walk in as a consultant and say if I was to mention that I'd been homeless for 2 years, they would turn their backs. I want to also explain to you not only the stigmatisation of this, which labels the person, not you are having an experience of homelessness, you are seen as the homeless. And the poor homeless, and society gets behind projects to help homelessness because there's a collective guilt around it. Because they can see the person's clearly in hardship, but people are too afraid to get involved because they've watched too many negative films, and this is where the negative film industry has not served our society. The constant rhetoric around negativity and violence, when violence is not significant, and it's not. Psychological violence is increasing without a doubt, but in Australia, our actual safety is actually pretty good still. We're not in a war zone. We're not under threat. Everyone's got cameras because of the psychological fear that's been manifested through corporate advertising as well. Oh, you have to be careful, you can't trust people. You can trust people. I went around the world by myself to face fear because I don't want to live in fear. And what I found is that people were not only trustworthy, they were actually very quick to help you, no matter what country you're in. But unfortunately, because we've got a culture of fear happening around us, it's being constantly fed. This has implications for homeless people because then we're seen as problematic. And if the media gets hold of a story where, let's say, a homeless person has done the wrong thing, then the whole community of people who are in this position are tarred with the same brush. Now, the highest growing group of homeless are older women like myself, 28%. I'm also a peacemaker. I'm no threat to anybody. I'm also well trained in the sense that I'm not going to impose on a person. I'm not going to use a person. And yet I've been accused of that through ignorance that's been levelled at me through my own family. I've never used anybody, and I would never take anything from anyone that they weren't willing to offer, because the reality is I'm in economic hardship. It is a reality. It's not too lazy to get a job or sponging off people. It's not. And even if a person was doing that, well, how do we help them to empower them to not do that so they can at least find their own empowerment? Our whole intention should be to help the person to get back on their feet. It's not about denigrating people, putting them down, bullying them because they seem vulnerable. There's no doubt that those who are on the street get attacked more. There's a lot more rapes too of the women. That's because they're perceived as vulnerable. It's actually the vulnerability that's problematic, the perception of it, because then they think you're an easy target. And for those who are powerless, and the ones who bully are the most powerless, believe it or not, more so than the homeless, because they're the ones seeking the power. So they do it through violent means. But because they're unconscious in what they do, they don't have the presence of mind to actually self-reflect and look at, well, why am I doing this? What did I get out of this? What about the other person? Empathy steps in. Now, the major issue with homelessness is a lack of empathy. A lack of willingness to get involved is another serious problem for the homeless. Typically, those in this position have been marginalised and they don't have support. Now, in my case, I don't have income. I can't access homeless services. Now, people could say, well, for goodness sakes, get on Centrelink. My father said that, get on Centrelink. I said, I can't, because I'm not in a system that's respecting my democratic rights. If I feel something's not right for me, or I think a culture is toxic, I'm not going to enter it. I've had issues in the past, and I'm not going to put myself in harm's way. I'm not. I could cry at this point because I actually feel very upset about it. I've had my democratic rights denied to say no to what I think is not good for me. Not only that, when there's been reports of corruption in the system because it's a competitive model, whenever you turn a social service into a competition, the needs and the interests of those who are the most vulnerable are not going to be met here. It's going to be the profitability, the bottom line of that competitive system. And it's not, in my view, reflective of what the public will to contract out government services when it is a responsibility. It's the duty of the government to provide those services to its people through the tax base. That's why the tax base is paid, is to pay for social services, infrastructure, telecom, the telecom lines. They're not to be privatised. They're supposed to be in public hands because they're a public good. They're servicing a lot of people. The moment you privatise stuff, you allow other interests to come in who do not have the public interest at heart. And this is a massive problem for those of us homeless. There's an emotional disconnect, socio-emotional disconnect. I don't care about you. I'm going to not deal with this problem because it's clearly your fault. There must be something wrong with you. What did you do to get homeless? Who did you annoy? Why do you think the system owes you? These will be the arguments. Oh, someone will help her. No, actually, what I've experienced is there is a little bit of help here and there. I did have a family member who I was grateful for, and I will put that there because that'll always be deep gratitude. It's not just, I'm not saying it, it was my mum. She did help me, but we had a misunderstanding, and there's other parties involved who judge me. I've been severely judged for my mother making the decision to she actually offered to give me the money, saying that she believed God told her to. That's what she told me. I'm not going to say no when I've got no income, and I'm conscientiously objecting to what I see as a system that, because of its competitive nature, is also reflecting corruption, and that was borne out by the ABC 730 report. So it's not possible for me to go back to that. And then people say, well, you've got plenty of skills, go get a job. My age works against me, and I haven't been in the job system. I haven't got a background anymore that would be considered current. I know I've got great skills, but it's very difficult when you've got a lot of people who are actually been in the position who are in front of you. So it's all very well for someone to say, go get a job. If you haven't got a partner, you've got no support. If you lose your friends, which is what happened to me when I, found myself evicted and without income, they all dropped off. They didn't even email to see if I was okay. And it's not unlike those who fall from grace with work. Let's say you lose everything. There's many, many stories where people see their fair weather friends. People just come and go. And that's when you realise that friendships are not really about them actually loving you. It's really about what they perceive about you. And I don't want to make this a negative thing, because there are good friends too. I've certainly got a couple of very, very, very good friends who stepped up big time, particularly one. And one, as far as I'm concerned, one good friend is worth 1,000 false friends. But the point I'm making here, people don't know your life circumstances. If you're an honest person like I am, I have to stay true to what I believe in. I can't, and it's not being rebellious, it's not being annoying, it's being honest. But because denial comes in, people don't want to know about it. Even in the homelessness sector, because I've got no income, they didn't tell me directly that I couldn't access housing or homelessness services. They said I could, but then I would get rejected and I wouldn't know why. I went to an organisation in Lilydale who give out food. I signed paper to register with them. They help homeless people. When I contacted them again, they couldn't find my file. It's gone. In fact, I had a heated discussion with the guy on the phone who was very rude to me, in actual fact. And I said to him, you need training in conflict resolution. There's a problem here. I need food. Totally insensitive. When I make disclosures of my homelessness to anyone, really, I've made disclosures to many, many people, at least a couple of hundred, I would say, via email. There's no comment that comes back that says, are you okay? Can I help you? I can count on one hand the number of people who have actually offered and have shown concern, like genuine concern. The majority just go, oh, well, let her go. I'm not going to ask for money. I'm not going to go and freeload on people. I'm not. No way. It's because I've got respect, self-respect and dignity. I'm not going to do it. Nobody. I always have a few mantras that go through my mind, which is no one owes me. I'm not a victim. I am self-determining and self-reliant as much as I can be without income. I'm not complaining, although I am asserting that we need a rights framework in place here. We need a Bill of Rights. I need to have the right to shelter. A woman should not be homeless for 2 years. A woman should not be in a position where she can't get emergency funding from her own government. And the reason I didn't get that emergency payment is because I'm not on Centrelink. Why am I not on Centrelink? As I explained, I have a conscientious objection to a system which I feel is compliant, not democratic. It's also issues of corruption that were raised, and I'm not going to support companies in arranging activities and work to get what they call corporate welfare from the government. No way. That's not my job. My job is not to sit there and be compliant so they can make money from my hardship. No way. I agree with the government providing those services with unconditional welfare. I don't agree with it becoming a job-based thing, particularly in a contracting global economy where there's going to be less jobs, and when they're envisaging disruption, when they're envisaging an IT technocracy taking over, where we're looking at 40% unemployment down the track. That's a quote from La Trobe University's Future Ready report. 40%, that's nearly 1 in 2, are going to be unemployed. One step away from homelessness. And now people will say, we need a UBI, universal basic income. But what happens, like in my case, when I speak up, I get cut off Centrelink. I was cut off Centrelink. I didn't go off Centrelink, I was cut off. What happens in a future government? Let's say they're autocratic. Let's say democracy's gone. Let's say they've completely taken away all those rights, human rights. And this is not just enshrined in Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the international protocols. This is just a basic decency of how you treat people. Because these rights only got enshrined in those charters because of the absolute abuse of regular people through the First and Second World War. They were the victims of this. These bills of rights, these charters of rights, are there to protect the people from misuse of power. So what happens in the future? I get a universal basic income. Let's say through an IT scenario, we get profiled. And let's say that someone who's into peace is seen as an activist. They're seen as left wing, which is that's how they're seen. I'm not actually in that ideological category at all. I see myself more as universal, and I see myself as loving people. Peace is a natural desire. Peace, love, and truth are natural desires when you care about people. When you don't care about anyone, it's go eat cake. I don't care about you. You're not my business. That's selfishness. And that's what creates the isolation, creates the lack of support, creates the conditions for severe hardship and suicide to happen, because the mental health of people is affected when they recognise no one cares. It's the lack of care. It's not duty of care, it's lack of care that is the cause of homelessness. There's no way you would remain homeless if people seriously cared. They'd take you in. And one of my friends in between house sits did. She was the greatest example of unconditional love I've ever seen. She brought food for me. Never at any point did she make me feel guilty for receiving. She gave me a space actually to heal, because I needed to heal. I needed to figure out what had happened to me. Talking abuse here. I had to figure it out. I needed the time. I couldn't work, in actual fact. But I don't want to go on a mental health plan, because then you it gets levelled at you that you've got a mental health problem when you don't. You've actually been hurt by circumstances. You've not been respected. In my case, I wanted to end my life, and they could say, oh, mental health. No, it's not. It's a natural response to when you're not being treated humanely by others, when you're just being ignored as if you don't exist. That's actually a mental health issue that does that. That's a toxic culture that does that. And yet the victim blaming, from a bullying perspective, is you blame the victim because that absolves you of responsibility. That's what we do. Don't want to take responsibility for the harm we cause others because we won't step up and own our behaviour. And I'm talking it from the perspective of those who can see the suffering is happening and do nothing. There's big questions around why they do nothing. And when they know you're going to end your life, they don't save you. Sink. That terminology, sink or swim, is I'm afraid that's the hard edge of all of this. So yes, the homelessness is a hard thing for society to face, because you're going to have to face the emotional issues that have been neglected by families, by organisations, by society in general and by those at the very top who are completely disconnected from the ground. My videos have come from inspiration, all these videos that I've been doing, and it's coming from authenticity too, where I'm bravely speaking up about my circumstances and about my beliefs and about my experiences. I'm doing that because it's inspired within me to do it, firstly. Secondly, I want to benefit others. Thirdly, I want to put the message out to those who are actually engaging in these negative, toxic behaviours that you're actually harming your society. And your denial only lengthens the delay in terms of the resolution of these problems, which need resolution. We've got too much cost involved in our society in respect of the court system, and then the threats in there in respect of legal ramifications for speaking up that should never be occurring in a democracy. There shouldn't be a cost anything when people are in dispute. If they're doing it for the money, which some of them are, many of them I think are orchestrating disputes through the court so they can make money out of the other party, or they're trying to intimidate the other party using the courts as a form of bullying. That's extremely toxic, and that doesn't resolve anything. It just plunges people further into hardship. Nobody deserves to live in hardship like this in a wealthy country. Admittedly, Australia is on credit. Our wealth is actually a fake wealth. It's not real. Our wealth actually was in the ground. It was all our resources and minerals, but they got sold off to overseas interests. In fact, in 1975, Gough Whitlam was trying to buy back the farm. That was the Kimlani affair. You might want to look into that. And you might want to look at my actual blog. You're most welcome to look up some of the articles that I've put together, because I have been writing, because I'm also trying to make sense of the world that I'm living in that doesn't appear to be very kind, to be honest. So if you go to wpas.worldpeaceful.com, that's my blog, Pieces Out True Nature. And I've pretty much covered the entire spectrum. I come from an economics background and I come from market research, but I'm also a peacemaker. And I'm into conflict resolution. And I'm into integrity and honesty. I don't believe in keeping up appearances. I'm not interested in a million hits on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter. It's not about popularity, life. Your popularity doesn't mean you have worth. And some people are trading on the social media in order to make more money when it was originally a public, free space where we could actually meet each other and communicate. It was never meant to be a commercial venture. Now we're getting exclusivity happening in the internet where you have to pay as a subscriber to access things. This is that inclusion, exclusion, which is what homelessness is about in a lot of ways. You get excluded from society because you don't have the money. I have to think about, well, how am I paying Rego this month? For me, last Rego was a miracle. Someone paid me for a house sit. It was a house sit. It was a one-off. That paid my registration. The money that's come have been miracles without a doubt. When I've really needed it, and then I think, okay, I'm coming up to the next period. How am I going to pay? You have to become resilient, and I believe this is the future human. You have to become resilient. You have to forgive people for their ignorance and for their mistake, and I can do that easily. That's not hard for me at all. I easily forgive. I also would ask for forgiveness if I've done anything that's caused any hurt to anyone else. It was never deliberate. I'm very open, and I always have been. I've been open since I was very young. I just say it as I see it because I don't fear speaking the truth, you see. I don't do it with an intention to hurt anyone or to demean them, because I wouldn't want them to suffer. That's why I don't do it. It's not because I'm clever. It's because I care. I don't want them to suffer like I have. Not at all. What I want for others is their happiness. I really want them to be happy because you know what? When they're happy, they'll be good to each other. They'll actually stop thinking about their own interests and actually look at someone else's for a change. Stop using your society as a cash cow or some sort of consumer and actually see them as citizens walking past you. See them as potential friends, not enemies, not stranger danger. Majority are great. And if they are a bit odd, you'll know, you'll sense it, and you'll just move away. We have a lot of growing up to do as a society. We're actually very immature in the way that we respond to social, emotional problems. The homelessness is yes, you can put money into organisations and non-profits, and they can document the homeless journey and they can promote it and they can lobby for housing, but it's private housing. There's private finance coming into that. That's not a public asset. And then we've got the smart technologies, sensors. We've got phones being monitored. This is not appropriate. It breaches privacy. And I can tell you from a homeless perspective, I do not want my privacy breached. I don't want people surveilling me. I would rather have an honest conversation over a table. I'm quite happy to be honest. It's not a problem. But don't demonise me. Don't organise files and see that as a potential threat because you're doing risk management, not conflict resolution. Your risk management is actually evolving conflict. It's why the conflict stays with you, is because you are seeing it as a threat and you're fighting and resisting it, rather than saying, you know what, compassion would lead me to actually help this person. They might actually need an apology for what they've been through. And then you go, oh, litigation. Not necessarily. Healing could be the actual outcome. You might make a friend out of this. If you're brave enough and honest enough to own your part, to resolve the matter. It isn't kind or pure or ethical or values-based to leave 116,000 people homeless in our country. It's not just small numbers. It's a massive, massive issue. And that homelessness affects our society big time because it's a mirror to us all. How can they? People see the signal that's sent by the government, the quiet signal which says leave them on the street, because they know the government can do it. The government spends billions on infrastructure. Government upgrades this, upgrades that. But a human life? It's like when I did Triple R the other day. I did Triple R. I'm starting a program, but it's ad hoc at the moment, because I'm going to give a voice to the homeless who have no bloody voice at all. And then we get the inflated other side where everyone goes, oh, you poor thing, and there's over the top empathy. We don't want your sympathy. What we want is action. Now, it was Auntie Shirley Firebrand, I think her name is, who was the Indigenous elder who was appearing at the homelessness conference. She struck a really deep chord in me. I actually had chills up my spine when I heard her speak, because the Indigenous, who are the highest group of homeless, and we just go, oh, well, they've all lived out in the bush. Well, no, this current generation, they haven't. Previous generations haven't lived out in the bush. Yes, they have a history, a 50,000-year history, but they've been socialised into a Western culture. They're socialised into this culture. And what that means is they're losing those survival skills out in the bush. And that's not to say there aren't some extraordinary Indigenous people. One of them I noted, I actually had support from them when I was on Facebook. It was the Indigenous that helped me because they felt the empathy. Guy walked from Western Australia to Canberra on foot. Can you believe? I was so impressed. I was going to walk to Canberra from Melbourne. I actually dreamed it, and I contacted the Salvos here, but they weren't of any assistance to me whatsoever. And in fact, I was ignored, which I found awakened me to the fact that they get welfare fatigue. They become hardened because they get that many needy people, and they probably get people who haven't got good education. Maybe they're not respectful, and they start to disregard them. They lose respect. So that was very disappointing for me. So The bottom line is that this is a national emergency and we have to resolve this problem. I want to create an eco-village. I've called it the Courtney's Patch Eco-Village. It's on my website. I advise you to go to my website and have a look at my story, because this is an urgent appeal to my society to actually not only just give money. We can't just, it's not about the money. It's about caring about each other. It's about advancing Australia fair. It's about no person left in poverty. That was Bob Hawke's words. No child be left in poverty. This was in the 80s, I believe, I think, or 1990. And of course, there are thousands of children. If we've got 116,000 people homeless, there's thousands of children that are. Children are also homeless in loveless families too. They're homeless when there's drug addicted parents who can't be present with them. Homelessness is not only the absence of a house, it's also the absence of love out of one's life, because people don't simply care, or they're busy, they don't have time, they have narratives going on in their head about why this person's homeless and why it's right to ignore them. And I wouldn't disagree with you having free choice, not at all. I would say if you don't want to give, don't give, because I wouldn't want to receive from anyone who doesn't feel calling in it. But I'll give you plenty back. It may not be money, it may not be food, it might be what I've learned, it might be insights, it could be wisdom that you hadn't thought of. See, there's always a symbiotic exchange here. It doesn't have to be monetary, but people just see it as a drain. Oh, if I give them, they'll latch on. Some might, but empower them, encourage them that they have the power to change their lives. But be kind to them. The most important thing is kindness. And I'm going to leave you with one last thought. I remember sitting on the train, and I'd come back from the Choir of Hard Knocks, actually, because Jonathan's allowed me to sing with them. I'm in a probationary period with the choir. I may cry about them because I had a look at their documentary, Australian Story. And I really love Jonathan, and I didn't know Jonathan was famous when I met him. I met him before I was homeless. I actually came and clowned with the choir to bring happiness to them. And I really connected. They're beautiful people. And then when my dad died this year, just give me a sec, he was actually watching Q&A, and Jonathan was on Q&A. When I found out that Dad was watching that the night before he died, I actually contacted Jonathan. I told him Dad had died and I was still homeless. He invited me to come. Why I'm feeling this deeply is because he's the real deal. That's why I liked him when I met him, because he had similar energy of a clown. Like, he was very loving, because clowns are loving, they're not scary. And when I hear the children talking like this, it breaks my heart. Clowned all over the world as a clown, and I love thousands of people. And the point of it was not to scare people, it was to make them happy. That's what the real clowns do. They make people happy. They do tricks and they smile at kids to remind them of happiness. So it's pretty heartbreaking when a whole generation is being taught that they're frightening. And I can thank Hollywood for that one, and those negative people who fund those types of programs. So the reason I cried then about Jonathan was, he said to me, "You'll find friends here." And he said, "You'll be safe." Because I haven't felt safe, actually. I felt trapped because I stood up. I'm a whistleblower. I spoke up. I don't feel safe. And in a way, I prefer to move around because I feel I don't want to be tracked. I don't have a phone, so I lose contact with people. I lose contact with my family, who aren't that supportive anyway, but my mother was. My mother was the one who was there for me, and I'll never forget that. She'll always be in my heart. I love all my other siblings as well, but I recognise they don't get it. and they're pretty harsh. It's all been, everyone seems to think from their own perspective. They don't recognise the importance of reaching out to each other unconditionally. It's not a transaction. So back to the Choir of Hard Knocks. I remember singing in there for the first time with the group, and I didn't know their faces. Like, I didn't watch TV, so I didn't know anything about their fame. But my father had died, and I remember singing a song, and I could feel the pain coming up. And I can remember looking around the room at all these beautiful people, and they would be the ones in society, you know, well, they know they've been judged anyway. They've all been homeless. But what I loved was the diversity. And I remember sitting there thinking, it's good that I'm here. I'm the new face of homelessness. It's like I'm just like everyone else. I'm the professional face of homelessness. I was an analyst. But I really like being with the people because they have suffered a lot, and Jonathan has helped them to turn their lives around through the singing, the One Song. Actually wrote a poem which I'll put on this video called The One Song, which I've sent to Jonathan actually yesterday. Because we've got to start singing in harmony as one society, and Jonathan's all about harmony. We've got to start, singing in this way and bringing love to one another and caring about people. This is not the world. I don't want to live in a world where we leave people on the street. I don't even want to take a house while I know that there's people on the street. I met a woman who's on the street. She was very frightened. She'd been beaten up, and she was, walking around with a trolley. She said she was starting to get mental health issues because they often have sleep deprivation. And it's not safe for women to be on the street at all. It's not safe for women to be homeless. But our men are not protecting us, are they? It becomes this ridiculous conflict, which it need not be. It's about caring about people. It's about working out your problems. It's about having the maturity to sit down and talk about it. It's not about, I only deal with you because, you're a staff member, or I only deal with you because you're a student, or I only deal with you because I have a duty of care. No, it's about caring about other people. And if there's a problem here, you sit down and you work it out because you care about what happens to that person. That's what's normal and natural. But we're normalising indifference. We're normalising detachment. We're bringing violence into the society via games and television. And then we say the world's not safe. Well, it's not safe because you're not creating an environment that speaks of safety, that speaks of well-being, that speaks of human kindness. That's what Patch Adams was about when I went to Russia with Patch. He talked about friendshipism, making friends with people, not because they're a good contact, not because you're going to get something out of it, but for the pure celebration of actually befriending someone and enjoying that community. That's who we are as human beings, is to come into community with one another. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I wanted to do this because, I am a positive person on the whole, but I, like anyone, I have my challenges with this because I get tired of it. I get tired, and I feel totally unheard. It's just been an extraordinary journey I've been on. The lack of care, and I sent my proposal, which you can look at on my website. I've sent this to the homeless sector. I haven't had a response from anyone yet. I'm hoping that they will. Anyway, go to http://ha dot world peace full.com. So that's world peaceful. This is all one word, world peaceful with 2 L's.com. So it's ha.worldpeaceful.com. Go to homeless and you can have a look at my story and my background, because I want to see change. I don't want change. I don't want coins. I want change. There's a great saying on the net about that. I'm not after your coins. I want change, and I do. Happiness Australia is the website, and what I want and what I've been involved in prior to all of this was to promote a happy, peaceful world. And I'm inviting my community, no matter who you are, I don't care what part of that community, whether you're in government, whether you're in intelligence, whether you're in business, whether you're on the ground, whether you're a child, I'm inviting all of you to contact me and get involved in creating a better world. I definitely have solutions, but I do need support in this. So I'll leave it up to you. We all get to choose. Thanks for listening and watching. Bye.